Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 14th and tonight's movie is Gerald's Game. This is based on a Stephen King novel that I read way back in the day, like well before this movie. And when I was reading it, I was thinking this would be very hard to adapt to a film because the plot of Gerald's Game is a husband and wife go to their lake cabin and they do a little bit of NSFW playing that involves handcuffs. And while the wife is handcuffed with both hands to the bed, the husband has a heart attack and dies, meaning that she is now stuck. So, if they were to make this in a movie, not only would most of it only feature one character, it's all very psychological in the book. So, they would have to figure out a way to translate that into the very visual medium of filmmaking. But if anyone were to do it, I could think of no one better than my personal favorite horror director, Mike Flanagan. I have watched four of his movies so far. All of them were reviewed for Horror Nights, and I thought that all of them were very good. I'm very interested to see what from the novel they are going to keep and what they're not going to include. I doubt they're actually going to include that whole psychic connection that's linking Gerald's game to Dolores Claiborne. I don't know how they would integrate that into this movie. The leading lady of tonight is Carla Gugino as Jessie. I know almost nothing about this actress, but she would go on to work with Mike Flanagan again on three of his horror miniseries, so I guess she did a good enough job here, at least in his opinion. Overall, I'm very intrigued. Gerald's Game would not be an easy book to adapt to film. I'm going to go check it out. We are on a roll. This is another fantastic movie. I think I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. It might be the best Mike Flanagan movie I've seen. I'd have to watch Oculus or Before I Wake again, but this was really good. This is able to adapt the source material into not only something that works for film, but into a project that I thought was better than the book it's based on. And in fact, any issues I have with this movie stem from its source material. I have read a fair number of Stephen King books in my day, and as I grow up, I more and more realize that I don't like Stephen King's writing. I like his supernatural stuff a lot more than the stuff where it's just people. I have read the book The Shining several times, and I do like that the best. But when he's making stories about just people, he just creates the most cartoonishly evil archetypes of people imaginable. The concept of Gerald's game, a woman being left alone handcuffed to a bed, is enough to build a story on. But then there's this other thing that they add about something that Jessie went through when she was 12 that I hated reading about in the book, and I hated having to see acted out in this movie. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about, and if you don't, you don't need to look it up. You don't need to know about that. But enough about that. Let's talk about the parts that I really did love about this movie. First of all, Carla Gugino, give her an Oscar for this performance. It was amazing. She was tasked with carrying most of this movie on her own, and she rose to the challenge. I was also really impressed by the screenplay and the direction because one big part of the book is the different voices in Jessie's head. She's not like schizophrenic, they're just different parts of herself manifesting in different ways. In the movie, I thought they were going to have some sort of inner monologue, maybe, but instead, what they did was turn these different voices into these two characters. The, I guess, inside Jessie's mind version of herself, not handcuffed to the bed, and Gerald, not dead. And Gerald seems to represent like her self doubts, like the things that she fears the most. And this other Jessie seems to represent like the sort of more self centered side of her. She is definitely more helpful than he is, but she doesn't give Jessie what she truly needs most of the time. Bruce Greenwood and again, Carlo Gugino, they did an amazing job acting these scenes out. One interesting thing is that when you compare the movie to the book, in the book, it became very clear that Jesse and Gerald were hanging on by a thread. You knew this from basically the beginning. It was explained to you. In the movie, at first, I thought that they were trying to tone down that part of it. But then you really see that that's definitely not the case when you actually get to the scene where Gerald dies. And maybe what they were going for here was that on the outside, this marriage looks fine, but on the inside, it's all sorts of messed up. And by the way, quick PSA, The reason why you should do your research before trying to experiment with things like this is to prevent these exact kinds of situations from happening. These were not play handcuffs. These were real handcuffs. They could not be unlocked without a key. And when Gerald died, the key was like on the table, like a little bit over, which might as well be on a different planet. And obviously, when you hear this situation, the first thing you think about is like dying of starvation or dying of thirst or something like that. But you also don't think about the fact that she is stuck in this position. She's basically crucified to the bed. The muscle spasms and the cramps and just the psychological torture of being stuck alone in a bed, unable to move for hours and hours on end. They really do illustrate that part of it very well in this movie. And while I do think that Jesse's backstory was a little bit over the top, there were other things that they added to this scenario that I do think enhanced the experience. In the book, there was a dog. I think the book kept calling him the dog formerly known as Prince. She just calls him Prince at one point, and I guess that's all they're going to do to reference it. That is a stray dog. And they make sure that you know that they left the front door open before they went in the room to play. And when he comes in, he sees this giant slab of meat in the middle of the floor, and he has nothing else to eat. There was definitely a lot more like vitriol and anger towards the dog on Jesse's part in the book. In the movie, she is like really upset with what's happening, but eventually she's just like, I have to ignore him. One thing that she can't really ignore is a character that for most of the movie you only ever hear referred to as the Moonlight Man. Any moments of like real horror in this movie are due to the Moonlight Man. And up until the very end, you do not know if the Moonlight Man is real or something else that Jesse's mind is creating in this trauma. So overall, the acting was great, the writing was great, the direction was great. The fact that they needed to adapt this horrible subplot from the original story in order to make this like a real adaptation, I wasn't a fan of that, but I don't know what else they were going to do. And the movie does wrap things up in a very satisfying way. I would recommend it. I would actually say don't even read the book, just watch the movie. The movie's a lot better than the book. And now I want to go into a few spoilers. For like the first half of the movie, you're really just thinking about the fact that she's trapped, handcuffed to the bed. But on her first night, she wakes up in the middle of the night and sees someone or something standing in the corner of the room. The dark figure steps towards and reveals to be this unusually tall and gangly male figure that looks more like a ghoul than a person, but he has like this little like bag that's filled with little bones and pieces of jewelry. Jessie really, really, really wants to believe that this is just something her mind is making up. But the part of her that's represented by Gerald in this movie points out a few things, like the fact that there is a bloody human footprint on the ground, and the fact that the dog had left the room despite being there the whole time up until then. It is this fear of the Moonlight Man and the idea of what he's going to do if he comes back that night, and the realization that if no one had come by now, they're probably not going to be coming for a while. Enough time will have passed that if they do find her, she will not be alive. And this forces her to find out some way to take matters into her own hands. And she gets visited by her younger self. In the movie, they used the little pet named Mouse. In the book, it was Pumpkin. But either way, this is the reason why they couldn't just take out that one part of the story, because it is this part of her that reminds her of a moment where she cut herself in broken glass, and that made her realize there is a glass of water up in the little shelf above the top. There was this whole thing where like she had to like grab it and reach it and be able to drink it, and it was all very nerve-wracking even though it was just a glass of water. But there is a source of glass around her, and blood, before it dries, is very slippery. I'm just going to leave you with those two facts and let you come up with what her ultimate escape plan was. It is successful. We do see every step of the process, but she is finally able to free one of her hands from the cuffs and go get the key to unlock the other cuff. And when she leaves the house, she sees the Moonlight Man down the hall. And when she approaches him, she takes off her wedding ring and gives it to him, really still hoping that he is just her imagination. She tries to drive away, but the blood loss makes her feel very woozy. She crashes the car, but she is eventually found and able to recover from this, at least physically recover from this. Much like in Misery, this is not something you're going to go through and have it not stay with you for a little bit after that. And the source of all of her trauma is the Moonlight Man. And then she finds a very interesting news article about a man who matches that description and collects the body parts of his victims and also their pieces of jewelry, their trinkets. And he is arrested, and she is finally able to face her fear, go to the sentencing hearing, and actually see him in person. He was real, he really was there. So if she hadn't escaped when she did, who knows what might have happened to her afterwards. He recognizes her, and then he mocks her by repeating the same things that she said to him. You're not real, you're just the moonlight. And she walks right up to him, looks him square in the eye, and in the book, she spits in his face. And they didn't do that in the movie. That might be the one thing where I feel like they should have stuck with the book. But in the movie, she just says, You're not as big as I remember you. And then she leaves. And one of the main themes throughout the entire movie is that ever since that day when she was 12 years old, that day had a total solar eclipse. And the corresponding traumatic event happened during that eclipse. So throughout the movie, it says that a part of her is still that little girl during that eclipse. She has never been able to leave. She has been trapped. And growing up, she was trapped in the shackles of her father and his manipulation. When she became an adult, she was trapped in this sort of comfortable prison that she had created with Gerald. And ever since her experience with the Moonlight Man, he has been trapping her in that horrible moment of her life. And when she is able to look him square in the eye and say, You have no more power over me, when she leaves, you can see an eclipse ending outside, which is supposed to imply that she's finally freeing herself. And I thought that was a great way to end the movie. Overall, I thought that this was an amazing adaptation and a very, very good movie all on its own. Mike Flanagan is still my favorite horror movie director. In fact, that probably just got cemented further with this movie. I thought that the movie was great. All right, thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.